So Christopher Miner Spencer was a successful businessman, a leader in the machine tool industry, a friend of President Abraham Lincoln, and arguably invented the gun that ended the war. This week on the 11th OVC, the weapons of the Civil War cavalry, the Spencer Carbine. So the Spencer Carbine is definitely one of my favorite firearms of all time. Actually, if I can, I like to hunt rabbits with it. Still working on the large game animals, because with the carbine, I'm not as accurate as I would like to be past 100 yards. But one of the things, well, you'll definitely see how bad that is later on in the video. But one of the things that's interesting and I think worth noting as far as a reenactor perspective is the idea that the Spencer Carbine should only be used in late 1863 events all the way through 1865. Now come 1865, it is definitely one of the more common carbines out there. If you remember from previous episodes, the Sharps carbine is by far head and shoulders above everything else, but come the end of the war in 1865, the Spencer caught up with just a few hundred or arguably just a couple thousand from tying the Sharps carbine, which is a pretty big feat considering how big of a gap it had to make up in only a 2-year time frame, arguably about a 1.5-year time frame. So as many of you know, the Spencer Carbine, and actually the Spencer rifle itself, was first used officially in combat in the Battle of Gettysburg and East Cavalry Field with the Michigan Brigade. You'll see here in a little bit that the actual Spencer itself was used privately and in small instances around the entire war, both Eastern and Western theater, because Spencer himself tried to sell his carbine and sell his Spencer rifle as the replacement for the Springfield musket, or the Springfield rifle. And so with that, you had a lot of private purchases, you had a lot of individuals purchasing them, and regiments purchasing them with their own money, as you'll see here. But one thing that's interesting is that up until 63, it really wasn't out there very commonly. There was a Navy order for about 700 units, but it wasn't until 1864 that we actually start seeing the ordnance returns, the Spencer carbine actually being used by cavalry units. The Spencer Carbine became a very popular arm within the cavalry during the American Civil War for obvious reasons. The actual operation of the Spencer repeating rifle or the carbine made it very easy, and one of the things that you can see in the writings of the time is that they advertise that the Spencer repeating rifle or carbine can be loaded with one hand. So as a reenactor, one of the things that you'll probably notice about the Spencer carbine is that depending on what type of ammunition you use, it will jam. One of the things that you'll have noticed, whether you use the red trimmed like shotgun type blanks, or whether you use the plastic blanks, or whether you use actual live ammunition, they tend to jam. Now one thing that stinks about the Spencer carbine, or the Spencer rifle, it's the same action, is that once it jams, it's hard to unjam in combat. It's hard to unjam without taking it apart at camp or at home or anything like that. So in order to prevent things from jamming, if you're going to use the Spencer carbine or the Spencer rifle as it's designed with a tubular magazine, here's one thing I recommend doing. And when you're loading, load with the barrel pointing down. And at the same time, use gravity when you eject the round by tipping it back up. So this I've noticed with our plastic rounds that we use the plastic copper looking, almost bullet type looking rounds that you put powder in and block it with a shotgun primer. We like those. They're nice and easy. We pump out about 1,000 at a time, and we're good for the season. But they jam really easy. In fact, honestly, most of the time I like to feed my carbine or my Spencer one at a time from the breech and just make sure that nothing jams, because when it comes to fake ammunition or blanks, they always tend to jam. Unless you use real copper or real brass ammunition, they're pretty much going to jam. At least that's been my experience. So again, one thing is, if you do have a problem with jamming carbines, or if you do have a problem with jamming Spencers, one thing that I found to work is use gravity with you to feed the chamber, and use gravity for you to then eject the last round. So Spencer was born at Manchester, Connecticut, June 20th, 1833. He remained identified with Connecticut industry all of his life and died there, prosperous and founder of the famous Billings and Spencer firm, manufacturers of the drop forging tools, on January 14th of 1922. Patentee of designs in silk winding machinery, automatic screw machines, and turret lathes, he is known for his development of the 7-shot Spencer repeating rifle and the carbine. It is estimated that 230,000 Spencer arms were used in the war. Some 94,000 Spencer carbines are listed as procured in the war at a cost of more than $2.3 million, and 12,000 Spencer rifles costing $467,000 were also ordered during the war. Spencer cartridges totaling 58 million were bought for $1.4 million also during the war. These purchases by the Ordnance Department span the period from January 1st, 1861 to June 30th, 1866, which was of course the end of that fiscal year. They do not include the Navy's early purchase of 700 Spencer rifles at the beginning of the war in 1861. Two basic Spencer arms were used during the war. In one of them, the rifle, there are two detail variations. The carbine and the rifle are of the same design exactly from the breech of the barrel to the butt of the stock. And forward, the rifle has a 30-inch barrel, a long forestock held by band springs and 3 iron bands. Beneath the rifle barrel at the muzzle is a bayonet stud for sword bayonets, specifically on those rifles delivered for the Navy in 1861. The Army pattern takes the regular socket bayonet triangular blade as used on the Sharps. The carbine has a 20-inch barrel and 1 band. In many of the parts, there are similar or identical dimensions to like parts in the Sharps arms, reflecting the assistance both technical and production given to Spencer by R.S. Lawrence, contractor on the Sharps carbine for the Sharps Company in Hartford, Connecticut during the war. The Spencer, for the Army at least, is the largest of all Spencer arms in the bore, taking the 5650 Spencer cartridge. Some confusion in nomenclature has existed over the various Spencer calibers, but Colonel B.R. Lewis is satisfied in his own researches that the Civil War Spencer must be the number 5650 straight case cartridge, not the 5652, which is slightly tapered or bottlenecked and nominally a smaller 52-inch bore. 3 general classes of arms exist that were made under Spencer's directions. The earliest are sporting rifles and a few semi-military small caliber carbines made and marketed in Hartford, Connecticut. The main factory for Spencer production was subsequently established on the premises of the Shearing Piano Company building in Boston. The Boston Spencer, as it's called, is the rifle of the war. And at the close of the war, the Burnside Rifle Company of Providence, Rhode Island, contracted to build and remodel Spencer arms. They turned out rifles which saw service for a brief time in the Indian Wars. So between his patent of March 6, 1860, and the following summer, Spencer found capital and organized a factory. His mentor was Charles Cheney, owner of the Silk Mills in Manchester, where he, Spencer, had got his start and where he returned after a brief period working at Colt's factory. Cheney had lived next door in Hartford to Gideon Welles, who in 1861 was a Secretary of the United States Navy. It was Cheney who introduced Spencer to Welles, and a test fire of the new gun was arranged at the Washington Navy Yard. A trial board under Captain, later Admiral, Dahlgren test fired the weapon in June 1861, and his report stated the following. The mechanism is compact and strong. The piece was fired 500 times in succession, partially divided between 2 mornings. There was but one failure to fire, supposed to be due to the absence of the fulminate. In every other instance, the operation was complete. The mechanism was not clean and yet worked throughout as the first. Not the least foulness on the outside and very little within. The least time of firing 7 rounds was 10 seconds. Within weeks, Spencer received an order for 2 rifles. A week later, there arrived a Navy Department order for 700 adapted for the sword bayonet. Frank Cheney and Christopher Spencer went to Boston to supervise the manufacture of these first Navy rifles in leased premises of the idle Chickering piano plant. It was the beginning of struggles and troubles, Spencer later told his children. The installation of the machinery, built a forging shop, making of the tools, fixtures, gauges, and many special machines, and finishing the first of the Navy guns, all within a year, was a Herculean task, he would later say. Though the Navy required but 700 rifles, apparently Spencer was willing to make 1,000 in the first lot. His daughter later recalls that from the Navy test yard came an order from the U.S. Navy Department for 1,000 guns. It is likely that Spencer would speak of making 1,000 guns and also of making guns for the Navy, and it is equally likely that given an order of 700, he would plan to make 300 additional for profitable speculative sale. But 1,000 arms was not enough to justify the expenditure of $500,000. Through James G. Blaine, Speaker of the House of Representatives at the time, a requirement for an additional 10,000 rifles was passed to the Secretary of War by the Navy, but the matter was not without its technical and official sanction. The rifles were obtained only after official favorable test ordered by General McClellan later on. According to Special Order 311, Major General McClellan appointed Captain Alfred Pleasonton, Captain A. Soley, and Lieutenant S.C. Bradford, all regular Army, to test the Spencer rifle. Spencer Company agent Warren Fisher got to McClellan's crowd. The test board under Pleasonton, who was to become a major general and organizer of the highly effective Union cavalry later in the war, convened on November 22nd of that same year, and he rendered its decision. Quote, "The rifle is simple and compact in construction, and less liable to get out of order than any other breech-loading arm now in use, which some think is taking a slap at the Henry with its exposed magazine spring." The board also tested the new 56-56 carbine and was particularly pleased with it, recommending it as a very useful arm for the mounted service. The Spencer firm made hay of this in a later catalog, stating, "Its special aptitude for the cavalry service may be inferred from the single fact that but one hand is required to load and fire it." Following November 22, 1861, Spencer was informed that he would write directly to the Secretary of War and tell him how rapidly Spencer rifles could be furnished and at what price. That the arm was satisfactory now was established. The day after Christmas, Simon Cameron was handed a letter by Warren Fisher, Jr., who was in Washington personally to get the order. The letter reads, "Sir, the proprietors of Spencer repeating rifle propose to contract with the United States for the manufacture and delivery of 10,000 of said arms with triangular bayonet and the usual appendages for service, at a rate of $40 for each rifle complete. The whole number of rifles to be delivered for inspection at the manufactory in Boston within a year as follows: 500 in the month of March, 1,000 in each of the months of April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and 1,500 in the month of December. Your obedient servant, Warren Fisher, Jr." With all this going on, the Navy order was ready for shipping by December 25, 1862, packed in chests of 10 guns each, plus sword bayonets, brushes, cleaning rods, and screwdrivers. These rifles were ultimately issued to the Mississippi flotilla of gunboats and cotton-clads. They proved effective counters of fire for the Confederate sharpshooters from overhanging river bluffs, who liked to drop mini-balls inside top-open gun turrets. By the end of December, the rifles for the Army were also being boxed and shipped out, presumably 20 per chest, as General Ripley had desired. By the summer of 1863, several thousand of these infantry arms had given a good account of themselves. Spencer had some luck with individual commanders and with men who were willing to buy rifles with their own pocket money. From lieutenants who ordered at company or battalion level to colonels on brigade command duty who ordered thousands at a time, he found a ready acceptance not only because it was a repeating rifle, but because he was ready to deliver it, unlike other manufacturers. By the spring and summer of 1863, Spencer rifles and carbines had been on many fronts, and reports began to come in, and they were popular. Captain Barber, Ohio Sharpshooters, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, May 19, 1863, noted the following, quote, "I have been drilling my battalion together with some companies of the 10th Ohio Infantry in target practice for some time past, and has given me a fine opportunity to test your rifle and compare it to the infield of the 10th Ohio also. And the result is more than 40% in favor of the Spencer rifle. It is admitted by all who have witnessed our practice that we have the best gun in the Army. On long ranges, they exceed our expectations. Specimen carbines were also distributed to officers who could hit the mark and report. Yesterday, Colonel T.E. Chickering of the 41st Massachusetts wrote the following, Yesterday, Colonel Wass and myself went out with our pickets. I took my carbine along for amusement. We fired at targets at musket range, and the target was about 5 feet long and 18 inches wide. I hit the target every shot and put one ball through the very center of the bullseye, beating the whole party. The little gun shoots most admirably and is all the rifle the company claims for it. At Norfolk, Virginia, where General King's regiment was digging out of winter quarters, Captain Chandler wrote to Spencer, "In every particular, it surpasses all breech-loading arms I have yet seen, and must eventually supersede the old musket for war purposes." One of the interesting facts of the Spencer carbine was the fact that the man who did the most to spread fame of the Spencers and made the Confederates talk of it as a horizontal shot tower and ask, "What kind of hellfire guns have you got?" was actually a person who did not want it in the first place. Colonel Wilder, commanding the 1st Mounted Brigade of the 7th Indiana Volunteers, passed a request for pieces of Henry rifles to Oliver Winchester under date of March 20th, 1863. Two of his regiments had received their horses and were exercising them as mounted infantry, fighting mainly on foot and arriving at the battle sites on horses. The men were willing to buy repeaters, so Wilder, probably as much from curiosity as any special partiality to the Henry arm, asked the New Haven Arms Company to state prices for 900 rifles with slings without ammunition. The men were willing and able to pay for those arms from their $13 monthly wages. Wilder himself, proprietor of a hydraulic machinery works company, would guarantee the amount. However, so durable was the arm of Wilder's second choice, which was the Spencer, and Mr. Spencer himself was so quick to supply his regiments that by the time the Henry people had informed them that they could not deliver the rifles in needed time, Wilder's brigade had to go with the Spencer repeating rifle. The order was passed to Spencer for 2,000 rifles to be used by Wilder's mounted infantry, the celebrated Lightning Brigade. During April or May of 1863, Wilder's brigade received an issue of their Spencer rifles. "My brigade of mounted infantry have repeatedly routed and driven largely superior forces of rebels, in some instances 5 or 6 times our number, and this result is mainly due to our being armed with the Spencer repeating rifle." He continued by saying, "Since using this gun, we have never been driven a single rod by any kind of force or number of the enemy. At Hoover's Gap in Tennessee on June 24th of 1863, one of my regiments fairly defeated a rebel brigade of 5 regiments, they admitting a loss of over 500, whilst our loss was only 47. No line of men who come within 50 yards of another force armed with the Spencer repeating rifles can either get away alive or reach them with a charge, as in either case they were certain to be destroyed by a terrible fire poured into the ranks by cool men thus armed. My men feel as if it is impossible to be whipped now, and the confidence inspired by these arms, added to their terribly destructive capacity, fully quadruples the effectiveness of my command." After Gettysburg, it created such a battle record that Spencer decided to again go to Washington. What he apparently sought was the complete arming of United States forces with his repeating rifle and the abandonment of the Springfield rifled musket production. The 7th New Hampshire, once issued some Spencers, was to have their Spencers called in and defective Springfields issued back to them, causing them to lose a battle. Such a thing Spencer hoped to avoid, for he intended to go to the highest authority. After the War Department ordered more Spencers, the heavy casualties at Chickamauga had sealed the value of the repeater in the war. As the war went on, the model officially adopted for the cavalry was a 22-inch barrel, blued and case-hardened with 3-groove riflings and firing the 56 cartridge. The caliber is often listed as a 52 caliber cartridge, using the number 56 Spencer rimfire cartridge. Bullet diameters of the round for this and the Spencer Civil War rifle listed run at .535 inches, .551 inches, .541 inches, and .555 inches. Michigan forces became famous with their Spencers. Though Wilson's Cavalry Brigade adopted the Spencer carbine as their badge or emblem, many of the troopers carried the infantry rifle, to the extent that Wilder in 1864, when asked his opinion of the Spencer, suggested that the rifle, which he deemed superior for mounted infantry, should be fitted with a rifle sling to enable it to be carried like the carbine. Apparently, the rifle was carried slung across the trooper's back by means of the swivel-fastened ordinary sling, or in more alert moments, balanced across the saddle. Many of the Michigan regiments, with the firepower of their Spencers, proved equal to much more numerous Confederate units. One of the famous reports by General Custer of May 14, 1864, specifies the following: "Mr. Cheney, dear sir, Being in command of a brigade of cavalry which is armed throughout with the Spencer carbine and rifle, I take pleasure in testifying to their superiority over all other weapons. I am firmly of the opinion that 1,500 men armed with the Spencer carbine are more than a match for 2,500 armed with any other firearm. I know this to be true from actual experiment. The Confederate estimation of the Spencer was quite as flattering, all things considered. An editorial in the Richmond Sentinel, December 8, 1864, after remarking on the general issue of breechloaders to the Union cavalry, and especially citing the Spencer rifles, went on to say the following: "The capture which we have made from the enemy embraced a large number of these Spencer rifles. It would be eminently desirable to arm our cavalry with them and thus remove that inequality between the opposing lines which told so heavily against us in the cavalry encounters in the past campaign. A practical difficulty exists, however, with which we are informed has not yet been removed. We call it to the attention of our Ordnance Department that the ingenuity which has won so many triumphs in obviating other difficulties may perform a similar service in this case. The Spencer rifle cannot be used with any cartridge yet furnished to our soldiers. The cartridges are put up in copper cases of a particular mechanism which we have not yet undertaken to make. Hence our valuable captures are stacked away in our armories so much as dead weight. The thing needed is the manufacture of cartridges for the Spencer rifle." It is interesting that this Richmond write-up did nothing to cheer up the harassed and much overworked General Rains of the CSA. As superintendent of the Confederate powder mill in Augusta, he had enough to do trying to supply the want of ordinary combustibles for muzzle-loading arms. He neither had the time nor the resources to take in and make cartridges for the captured Spencer carbines. This precious metal that he used was needed more, not for cartridge cases, which were too costly a luxury for the South, but to be used for percussion caps and other items to supply the Confederate Army. The issue of breechloaders like the Spencer gave rise to several tactics which were new to warfare at the time. Among them was a trick of firing a volley, waiting until the enemy began to charge, then mowing them down with the other rounds in the magazine. Another, modern tactic was moving or assaulting under fire, which Custer tried when he went between Davis's and Gregg's brigades and moved upon the South Carolinians. The repeaters lent an aurora of invincibility to the regiments which carried them. Without them they lost heart, and with them they were brave. The 7th New Hampshire Cavalry had so deadly a fire poured at them that they broke and fell back in confusion, reporting a New York Tribune paper. Dissatisfaction had been created among men by depriving them of the Spencer repeating rifle, by issuing, in lieu of this formidable weapon, Springfield muskets that are in an old and damaged condition. Unable to protect themselves with such guns, one wing of the regiment gave way and could not be rallied, while another wing still retained the repeating rifle, maintained its position until the ammunition was exhausted, when it too was obliged to fall back. The Spencer itself did not necessarily win the war. On the other hand, its contribution to the Union cause was substantial and did make a difference. Up to December 31st of 1865, the Ordnance Department had bought 77,000 Spencer carbines in addition to the 1,500 bought by Massachusetts, which were probably rifles and not carbines, and the tens of thousands bought by other state troopers individually. Of these arms, at least 30,000 were received under a contract issued to the Burnside Rifle Company in June of 1864 for 35,000 Spencer carbines specifically. The armory at this time was taxed to capacity, and the Burnside Company expanded their production. These are marked on top of the frame with the words Model 1865 and Spencer repeating rifle, patent March 6, 1860, manufactured at Providence, Rhode Island by Burnside Rifle Company. And of course, the serial number is also etched. These Burnside Spencer rifles had a 20-inch barrel and the new 5650 rim-fired cartridge. Bullet diameters that have been measured by originals range from .476 to .528, indicating a bit more regular. Many of these Burnside carbines were delivered too late for the use in the war, but definitely received use during the Indian campaigns which followed the war. The last use of the Spencer carbine in the American Civil War that was used in anger was by the famous John Wilkes Booth. Booth used a tiny pistol to do the deed, but in his secondary armament used a Spencer carbine. Ironically, when Booth was killed, he was holding a Spencer carbine, and ironically, the cavalry trooper who shot him was also holding a Spencer carbine. So with that history of Spencer and how he came about and his contracts that he had, one of the things that we can continue with is the Spencer rifle or Spencer carbine was more of a late war weapon. As you know, and as Spencer said in his memoirs, the Spencer repeating arm was first used in combat, at least widely used, I should say, in 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg at East Cavalry Field. The Michigan Cavalry had Spencers. Keep in mind, these were Spencer rifles, not Spencer carbines. And so if you're from a reenacting perspective, if you're reenacting and you have a Spencer pre-1863 or pre-Gettysburg for that reason, or honestly pre-1864, if you're anyone but the Michigan Brigade, you really need to do your research and make sure that they did not have Spencers. Later on in 1864 and on, Spencers became a popular arm. And as we said in previous episodes, talking about the Sharps or talking about the Smith carbine, the Spencer carbine was one of those carbines that later on in the war caught up almost to that in numbers of the Sharps rifle, which we've talked about, bar none, was the most popular carbine of all time of cavalry in the American Civil War. Now, before you do your impression, before you go out and buy a Spencer and spend that much money on a Spencer, do your research and make sure it is the right arm for your impression. Me personally, it's one of those things that, honestly, it's kind of like wearing this mounted service jacket. I love wearing it. I think it looks good and very dashing as a cavalier, but is it the most snug? Is it the most normal, usual, general? And the answer is pretty much no. I love my Spencer and I want to use it almost every reenactment. The problem is, if we're talking 1861, 1862, 63 even, you pretty much have to hesitate in bringing your Spencer if you want to be truly authentic, okay? Now, one thing that some reenactors do that, again, it's okay, I guess, is if they bring Spencers, if that's your only arm, then that's your only arm. And they're going to bring your Spencers, and then if it's a pre-1863 or if it's a unit that you're portraying that doesn't have Spencers, then you can go out and just load it one at a time in the breech and pretend it's a Sharps or something like that. I'm not going to harp on anyone who does that. And obviously it's the wrong arm for the impression that you're doing if it's pre-Gettysburg. But I understand that if you're going to go out and spend the money on a Spencer, that's probably going to be your main cavalry arm, and that's going to be it. Very few of us have the money to buy a Spencer and a Sharps and a Smith and a Merrill and a Star and all this kind of stuff. And so you're going to buy one, whatever it is, it's going to be one arm and you're going to purchase that. Which on the other hand is why in previous episodes I recommend buying the Sharps, is because bar none from 1859 to 1865, it goes all the way through the war. So if you're thinking about buying a rifle, thinking about buying a carbine for your impression as mounted cavalry, go with the Sharps because it is normal, it is usual, it is general, it is number one as far as carbines used. But if you're going to buy a Spencer, okay, know what you're getting. This is a 5650. They have 45 long Colts, they have 44, they have 44, 440, they have 4440, and it's one of those things that know what you're getting into. There's different calibers. I use the 5650 just because it's a little bit more accurate. It's not exactly what they had during the war, but it's a little bit more accurate than the 4440 or the 45 long Colt, but it's something that is usable. On the negative side, some of the drawbacks and some of the complaints that I hear about the Spencer carbine is that it is heavy. Now, compared to the Sharps, not so much, but compared to a lot of the other arms, especially like the Merrill or the Smith, arguably the Burnside, especially the Maynard, the Spencer is one of the heavier carbines out there. And so when it's bumping up against your leg, if you don't have it in the socket or the thimble, then it does bruise your leg up, especially at a gallop. But something to keep in mind, it is heavy. That is one of the complaints to it. Also, one of the benefits, again, is that it uses metallic cartridges or uses cartridges, so you don't have to deal with the paper cartridge that we do for the Sharps or very similar weapons like that. So enough of the talk, let's go to the range and shoot the Spencer carbine and the Spencer rifle and see how they do. All right, so in a live fire situation using the carbine at only 25 yards, you can see, and this is a reproduction obviously, but you can see we have a decent grouping of doing it offhand. Decent is relative. I understand you guys who shoot a lot better than that, but you know, we have a decent grouping, but it is high and to the right. I was aiming right here, but keep that in mind, a little bit to the right. But not too bad as a grouping at 25 yards with the carbine. So now at 25 yards using the Spencer rifle, you can see a much better impact. Now granted, these are reproductions. My carbine has been in my saddle in reenactments and live fire a lot. I probably knocked the sights around quite a bit, so there might be some explanation on why the carbine is high and to the right and a little bit of a bigger pattern. But the rifle, as you can see, much more centered, still a little bit to the right. Again, that might be me, but you know, we got 3 rounds touching. So out of 5 rounds total, we got 3 rounds touching, got a flyer off to the right, but overall, pretty decent group at 25 yards. So after live firing 21 rounds from both the Spencer carbine and the Spencer rifle, this is kind of embarrassing, but if you take a look, I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shots on target at 100 yards. This is one of the things I've noticed about shooting reproductions, or some reproductions, is that some are more, I guess, some are higher quality than others, especially on the sharp side of things. Again, the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters did a good video on this as far as the different qualities and the different riflings available for the Sharps carbine and the Sharps rifle. The same goes true for the Spencer reproductions, whether it's the Spencer rifle or the Spencer carbine. One thing I did notice on the Spencer carbine, it was significantly more inaccurate than the Spencer rifle, which makes sense, it should be. What's interesting about shooting the originals, that you'll notice if you ever get the chance to shoot the originals, is they are significantly more accurate, at least my experience, than the reproductions, at least some of the reproductions. Again, so for whatever it's worth, 21 rounds at 100 yards. I shot 21 rounds at 100 yards and only got 7 on target. So definitely not the experience that the original guys had in 1863 and 1864, and of course later on in the war, with them saying that they are accurate out to the same range as the mini ball, the 58 caliber, Springfield rifle. But it's something interesting to note. So lastly, to put it in context, one of the things I love about the ordnance returns is you can actually see the progression of units and arms and all the equipment that they use. And I love the telltale sign of the Spencer carbine and how popular it was in the regiments of the U.S. Cavalry in that war. So in September of 1863, even though we do know that units had it, no Spencers were turned in the ordnance returns, or at least that I found, as far as the ordnance returns of the 3rd and 4th quarter of 1863. Compare that to the ordnance returns of 1865. At the end of the war of 1865, the 1st Connecticut had 404 Spencer carbines. The 2nd Illinois, the 3rd, 6th, 12th, 17th Illinois, they all had about 700 total Spencer carbines. The 2nd Indiana had 166 carbines. You had the 5th New York that had 263 carbines. The 2nd New York had 613 carbines. The 18th and 19th New York, respectively, had each about 460 carbines. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 6th Kentucky. You had the 7th Kansas. You had the 1st and 2nd Maine, the 2nd Massachusetts, the 4th Massachusetts, the 10th Missouri, the 9th Missouri, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Michigan regiments, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd New Jersey, the 1st New York Mounted Rifles, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Ohio, the 4th, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, 14th, 16th, 17th, and 18th Pennsylvania regiments. And of course, you had the 1st Vermont, the 2nd and 12th Tennessee, the 1st and 2nd Wisconsin, and of course the 1st, 2nd, the 1st and 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th West Virginia had them as well. So looking at the ordnance returns of the units that had them at the end of 1865, at the end of the war, it was, had the war gone on for any length of time longer, pretty sure it would have superseded the Sharps carbine as the most popular arm of the American Civil War. Of course, it ended before that actually took place, but I think that's a testament to Mr. Spencer and his initiative of building a very strong, a very durable, and a very popular arm in the U.S. Cavalry during the American Civil War. So like in most episodes, we could spend hours just diving into the minutia and the details of the Spencer carbine, but I hope you liked this episode. Hope it wasn't too deep or too random for you. I thought there was was a lot of information on Mr. Spencer, his story of getting it to the field, because early on the Henry took off, you had other weapons taken off. I mean, there was just a large amount of weapons that took off during the early part and the mid part of the American Civil War, and I think it's a testament to Mr. Spencer and his inventiveness, why it became so popular, and again, the second most popular carbine of the American Civil War. So again, appreciate it. Please like us on Facebook. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Please ring the bell on the YouTube channel as well. Appreciate it. Until we see you again, ride hard.